Welcome to our Idea Social Innovation Lab webinar series. My name is Dan Samosh. I'm with Employment Relations Studies at Queen's University. I'm part of the broader IDEA team, which is a really big team. I'm going to share a little bit about the webinar process today, and then we'll get into our webinar with Ingrid Palmer. So first off, captions should be available, and as well, we have French interpretation too. So please, if you have any issues with either captions or French interpretation, let us know through the chat or through the Q&A function, and we'll try to resolve those as quickly as possible. Well, we will be recording the webinar too, so you should have access to this later on in the future, and slides should be shared as well. For the webinar itself, our structure is to run for about 1 hour, and the first part of the webinar will be a presentation from our speaker, and then after that we'll go to a Q&A. So during the Q&A, please interact with us through the Q&A function, and then I will read out the questions to our speaker. We also do have feedback mechanisms too. We're always looking to, make our webinars more accessible. If there's something that we can change, so please do let us know. Please send us an email or otherwise get in touch if you've noticed any issues or anything like that. But now, just turning to our webinar for today, we have Ingrid Palmer with us. I'm really excited about today's webinar. Ingrid is the Principal Inclusion, Diversity, Equity, Accessibility Leading to Belonging Advocate at Realize. And today's presentation is about uncovering episodic disability with an intersectional perspective on accessibility and belonging. So Ingrid, I'll turn it to you. Thanks.
Thank you so much for that lovely introduction. It's really my pleasure to be here with you this afternoon. And just as a further introduction, I'll let you know that I use she, her pronouns and that I am an individual that lives with sight loss due to retinitis pigmentosa. I've been legally blind since my late 20s. And so the love of my work comes both professionally and personally. So really good to be with you here today. And if we can move to the slide, who is Realize? I just want to introduce you to the organization that I work for. So Realize has been around for over 25 years. And Realize is the leading Canadian national organization promoting healthy aging, access to appropriate rehabilitation supports, and advocating for the full inclusion for people living with HIV and other episodic disabilities. Our organization develops reports, policy briefs, and papers and committee presentations, and our pioneering work in episodic disabilities actually originated in the disabling effects of HIV and its disproportionate impacts on 2S LGBTQIA+ and BIPOC communities living in Canada. And so our primary mission is to improve the health and wellness and well-being of people living with episodic disabilities across the lifespan, and to ensure our full integration in every aspect into society. And so that's a bit of who we are and what we do. But next slide, please. What is an episodic disability? This is a question that a lot of people have for me because it really is still a relatively new term. So episodic disability is actually a term that's found and protected in the Accessible Canada Act of 2019, and yet we are still having to do a lot of educating around what that is. So the term episodic disability describes chronic, often invisible, unpredictable forms of disability. And the conventional view and thought around disability really has been that it is something that is persistent and unchanging in its impacts. If you're a person who lives in a wheelchair, then your experience is the same every day. If you're a person living with visual loss, then your experience is the same every day. And this has been the kind of overarching thoughts of many people around disability. But the truth is that for many people living with disabilities, that they live with conditions that don't follow a stable pattern. Instead, many people experience periods of good health interrupted by periods of poor health, and also have experience symptoms that worsen over time. And so if we move to the next slide, we'll see here a list of some examples of episodic disabilities, and this by no means is a comprehensive list. It's always being added to, and for example, the other day I added sickle cell anemia to this list because I hadn't had it on it before, and it was just another example of an episodic disability. Um, so this list is always growing and changing. And people who live with complex chronic illnesses may or may not identify actually with the term disability. And that's despite experiencing ongoing life impacts. So regardless of whether somebody refers to themselves as someone that lives with a disability or not, it's really important that we understand that their rights for accommodation are protected by law. And as you scan this list, you might realize that you likely know someone living with one or more of these disabilities. Perhaps that person is you yourself. Perhaps that person is a coworker, or perhaps that someone is a person that you care about and care for. If we can move to the next slide, please. And intersectionality, this is a term that more and more we are becoming familiar with. For a while, it seemed to be, one of those terms that people were throwing around, but still didn't really have a lot of understanding around it. But I feel like that understanding is really grown over the last little while. And so intersectionality acknowledges the social factors that contribute to inequity, and it also provides understanding on the effects of accumulated trauma from different areas. And so people living with episodic disabilities who are also intersectional really encounter complex barriers to finding work, to keeping work, and employment, and also to returning to work, even after short periods of illness or missing work. And so folks who are racialized, women, folks who identify as trans or non-binary, or other members of the 2S LGBTQIS community, uh, persons with disabilities who identify with other religions other than Christian, and a host of other intersectional identities are also finding that besides ableism, that they're dealing with other forms of discrimination that further impact how they navigate not only in the greater society, but within workplaces as well. And so it's really important that we understand the need to see people with disabilities as whole beings who come with other identities, some of which may be additionally stigmatized, and understand that they are facing greater impacts to their ability to navigate than just the ones that come from disability, that there are nuances to the disability experience that are not generally widely considered or understood. And part of today's presentation is really building on awareness of this and really helping to change that because it's really important to understand how systemic barriers uh, affect people with disabilities both broadly and also by individual intersections. And if we move to the next slide, thank you. Idea to ideal. You know, over the past many years, we've had many different iterations of, EDI, DEI. The most recent has been IDEA because we really recognize that accessibility and people with disabilities were being left out of the inclusion, diversity, equity movement, and realize has coined a new framework with the addition of that L that stands for leading to belonging. And how this came about was that through our ongoing research in our community, we kept hearing time and time again from our intersectional community members how, even in the presence of workplaces and other spaces that promoted inclusion, diversity, equity, accessibility, and accommodation, that folks were still feeling excluded, that they were still feeling stigmatized and left out. And that really brought home the importance of belonging and that we really need to have an intentional focus on bringing that into our work to ensure that the end result really was that people were feeling connected to their places because we saw that even in the presence of IDEA, principles and promotions that people would leave workplaces and leave other spaces where they were still not feeling included and a part of. So the creation of the ideal framework we recognize as a real important framework because that lack of belonging was a very strong or the creation of belonging also is a very powerful driver in retention and how people are experiencing their workplaces and other spaces that they occupy. And so really incorporating an ideal framework onto how we do our work and how we view how we relate to people, we think is the next iteration in DEI work. And if we move to the next slide, the ideal community consultations. So having this information and having created this framework, Realize embarked on what we called the ideal community consultations. And this was about um, partnering with organizations across the country in order to build the capacity of employers to respond effectively to the challenges faced by intersectional employees living with episodic disabilities, to increase awareness and also even to really fill in that gap of research led and created by community. And so community-based research is a real important gap that the ideal community consultations also worked to fill. And so if we move to the next slide, you'll see here the list of the 12 partner organizations that we worked with in the rolling out of this research project. And so we had partnerships with these 12 diverse disability serving organizations across the country to hold community-based consultations within their own communities to really hear directly from community about what they were experiencing and to hear from them what their solutions, their proposed solutions would be for employers and other organizations to combat these detrimental experiences. And so here you'll see the list of the 12 partner organizations that we worked with over that year. And these organizations um, represented ethno-racial, cross, disability, diverse faith, and gender identities to really spotlight some of the harmful practices that community was experiencing, and also to receive their proposed solutions to improving equity and to combating ableism and um, the other detrimental experiences that they were coming across in the workplace. And if we move to the next slide, I'll just talk briefly about the methodology. The consultations took place from January 2023 to August 2023. Each organization submitted their own individual reports, which were then rolled up into one executive report. And at the end of this presentation, we're going to drop the link. So everybody, I really encourage you to really go through the report yourselves and to see the really incredible experiences, information, and learning that came out from each one. And one of the great things that came about from community, working with community, was to see the diverse ways, approaches, and supports that were provided by each organization to the community, and really represented and modeled much of the solutions that they then proposed later on. So if we move to the next slide, we'll talk about the impacts on employment of episodic disability. And so people living with episodic disabilities really encounter, as I said, complex barriers to finding work, to keeping work, and to coming back to work from even short periods of illness. Um, and so it's also really impacting on the fear of people with disabilities to even look for work, really knowing how disability is stigmatized. People spoke about the visibility of disability being a detraction from being able to obtain work because disability is so negatively perceived, and also the invisibility of disability also being detrimental in the sense of the perceptions there are on invisible disabilities, which most episodic disabilities are, and the misunderstanding of the complexities that come along with having a disability that isn't easily perceived by others, fatigue and brain fog and other impacts of episodic disabilities that can't be measured by the eye, but that are really have really real impacts on folks is part of the challenge of navigating work with episodic disability. And if we go on to challenges in the workplace, according to many of the submitted reports, we really heard that a lot of people working with episodic disabilities felt that they didn't have time to even access supports that were available, just due to the expectations and the loads on their job, and even the process of going through the accommodation process, that forms were just another barrier, and the whole process being a barrier in itself to accessing that. Feeling about not having the ability to have accommodations for religious time in the workplace was something that also came up, and also not being able to um, just do what you needed to do to look after yourself in the workplace to mitigate um, the effects or the impacts, the symptoms of episodic disability really was challenging for folks in the workplace. There was also a lot of reference to not feeling confident in workplaces to adhere to the laws and not to discriminate with people with disabilities. And we heard from a lot of participants, particularly, of course, intersectional participants, that when they heard or witnessed discrimination on other factors outside of disability, that also played into their lack of confidence about coming forward with their needs. So if they heard racial slurs, if they heard, Islamophobia or experienced Islamophobia in their workplace, or heteronormative um, norms or ways of being in their workplace, that wouldn't lend to confidence then about disability being something that is supported. So having that social stigma around a lot of parts of their identities, experiencing toxic positivity. Oh, you can do it. Just keep a smile on. Gaslighting, particularly around invisible disabilities. Oh, it can't be that bad. And little statements that people drop inadvertently really have an impact on the experience of employees with disabilities. When it comes to culture, as I said before, how disability is perceived, how performance is perceived and measured, and even on relationships, um, the lack of really building really connective relationships in the workplace, when folks feel like they're only spoken to in relationship to their job, but those really significant casual conversations flow around them and don't include them. They don't get the invite to the after work drink or the weekend barbecue. Even if they have accessibility in their workplace and they work in a diverse place, if those feelings of exclusion along those lines continue, we do hear and see that people will leave those workplaces. If we go to the next slide, I have some questions here. So this slide asks, what do individuals with episodic disabilities wish that their employers, managers, and HR departments really knew, understood, and respected? And some of the things we heard were about folks really understanding that employees with disabilities want just enough. They want just enough accommodation and support to do what they need to do to fulfill the requirements of their job. They're not looking to get away with anything, to get out of things, and those like stereotypes that come along with accommodations. Uh, Employees with disabilities just want it to be understood that they want what they need to fulfill their jobs and nothing more. They want folks to understand that because of their disability, that they come with really great skills. They come with great time management skills because of the necessity that they have to do with managing their disability. Through the experience of disability, that also brings really great creativity and problem solving skills. People with disabilities bring really unique insights into promoting respect, acceptance, and promoting inclusion. And so their insights and their knowledge need to be leveraged when we're thinking about improving and devising policies and programmings in our workplace. People with disabilities are ideal to be participating and to be lending their knowledge to that end. And so that's just a few of the things that people with disability wish that employers knew and understood better. The next question on the next slide is around how can workplaces cultivate cultures of inclusion and accessibility without requesting employees to disclose their identities and situations, and without relying on visible indicators of disability. This is a huge one that came across all 12 of the reports, time and time again, that disclosure really remains a really big issue among employees with disabilities. And as I said earlier, the process of accessing accommodations with a lot of times a multitude of really complex forms that need to be filled out and a lack of adherence to law. So sometimes folks not really understanding what they need to know versus what they don't need to know. And so you don't need to have an individual's particular diagnosis, but you do, of course, need to have a doctor's note outlining what that person's limitations are and what their needs are so that you can work to accommodate. And so we really would like to encourage focus on building relationships and connections. Focus on um, approaching people with curiosity and interest in understanding what their individual needs are, and having focus on having ongoing conversations, knowing that one, two, or three conversations is not going to suffice, but having regular check-ins. How are things going? Being willing to give something a try and adjust as necessary, but that flexible component really goes a long way to supporting, accommodating people. The other thing that we can do is to really make sure that we are reminding employees, and that's all employees, on a regular basis about what's available and what their rights are and what programs and resources are available as a whole. That way, we're not waiting for people to come and say, I have this or I need this, but that everybody is being informed of what is available to everyone altogether. And that way, we're not waiting for people to disclose or identify to know what's available in a workplace. And that opens up trust and transparency and really works to fostering those relationships that I spoke about to where employees feel comfortable, like I can go and have a talk with my manager, with my supervisor, because they've been speaking openly about accommodations and about what's available. And that can really work towards changing culture and changing the way that we interact and relate within workplaces. And so that's a real easy takeaway, I think, that we can start to implement, because a lot of times we look on accommodations as being something that's going to be costly and cost a lot of money, and recognizing that the relationship part and the connecting part doesn't cost anything and is really incredibly impactful on how we navigate and how we relate to one another in the workplace. And the next slide, when we're talking about how employers can really cultivate these spaces of inclusion, one of those ways also is to make sure that everybody all together is learning um, about one another's experiences. When employees see their identities and their experiences reflected in training within workplaces, we hear that they feel valued, they feel respected, and it takes that onus off of those most impacted having to do the educating for everyone in their workplaces. And when they feel like their organizations are making efforts to ensure that diverse learning and training is happening for everyone and that everyone's rights are being explained together as a whole, and these opportunities to learn and share and grow are happening collectively, that works really well towards changing the culture within places if it hasn't been one that is really sensitive to disability and sensitive to diverse identities. And it just really fosters that ability for people to understand experiences that may be completely different from their own, and to understand how they can reach out and connect with other people. Because one of the other things we hear is sometimes, even if people are not necessarily experiencing overt discrimination in their workplaces, like microaggressions, that sometimes when people don't know how to approach somebody different, they just don't. And when people feel ignored or isolated or left on their own, that's also a real detrimental factor to remaining in a workplace. On the next few slides, I picked out some quotes from some of the reports that have just really struck me and stayed with me, and these are just a few. So the first one is employers must generate a space where their disabled employees do not hesitate to come forth with any concerns and or needs that must be met. And that comes from the needs report. And that speaks to what I said about the importance of fostering that climate and environment. On the next slide, we have a quote from Race and Disability. And this quote says, "The employer benefits when I can do my job well. Both my employer and I are working towards the same goal. It's mutually beneficial. They are not doing me a favor." I love this quote. This is one of my favorites because accommodation is usually seen as only benefiting the person receiving it, and that is absolutely not true. Whenever any employee with a disability or without one gets whatever they need to fulfill the requirements of their jobs, that is a mutually beneficial thing. So we need to look at accommodations as a good thing for everyone. The next quote on the next slide reads, "People don't always understand that episodic disabilities aren't just about the physical symptoms. It's the mental toll too. You start questioning your own abilities. Can I commit to this project? Will I be reliable?" It's this constant uncertainty that's mentally disabling. And this comes from, experiencing the stigmatization that, becomes internalized by people that are constantly faced with some type of discrimination or lack of value. The next quote reads, "So it's not necessarily that I am getting overt racism or ableism. It's just the assumptions that I don't or I wouldn't be interested, that I I don't have the skills. I wouldn't have the ability to do certain things I have to that I have to kind of push back on." So this goes again with, not being invited to those, social engagements that other employees are inviting their other colleagues to, and being, perhaps passed over for promotion, or not being given mentorship or, upskilling that other employees are, because assumptions are made on your capacity. And the last quote says that disability is my power. My disability is letting me know that I am not a tool, that I'm a human being, and that, the pain isn't the issue anymore. It's how it's perceived by others. And that's from ACAS, speaking yet again to stigmatization and misperceptions. And if we move on to the next slide, and we're looking at ideal accommodations in the workplace, once again, when we're thinking about culture, there must be a normalization of need, that's something that everybody has, and that's a good thing, and that we're having cultures that are seeking to empower and celebrate employees with disabilities. Representation is really important, particularly of queer, non-binary, and BIPOC people with disabilities in senior positions. Really, really important to have that move. We've done really good on frontline and entry level, but we really need to move into senior level management and have that representation be fulfilled there. Once again, being flexible, having flex time, frequent breaks really speaks to conditions like diabetes, where people need to manage their food intake, and that will help with their productivity. Having tech and ergonomic furniture, noise canceling headphones, and many other helpful devices, and having that prayer space, giving people time to connect spiritually within the work hours really leads to increased productivity. And if we move to the next slide, when we're talking about recommendations that came from community out of the reports, and these are a few that I picked out, we're talking about demonstrated ideal leadership. And this again speaks to senior leaders being visible in your support of marginalized groups all of the time. We're just coming up to Black History Month, and it's great that organizations are going to have specific things going on in that time to recognize that. We have that at Pride Month. We have that maybe at National Accessibility Week or International Day of Persons with Disabilities. But guess what? Folks also want to feel that all throughout the year, not only at specific times. So it's really important that effort is made in that way. When we're looking at revamping policies, as I said, got to ensure that those most impacted are informing on what's being developed, that all employees understand that they have the right to be supported and that they will be supported and consistently, and having data inform on what we're doing. If you're not keeping data, you have to start. How do you know that what you're putting into place is doing any good or is the right thing if we are not keeping track of its impact? Really, really important. Um, and we really need orgs to just continue to work to ensure that that culture is really sensitive to the unique needs of diverse employees and not only some. Flexibility and relationships. I know I've said that many times already, but it cannot be repeated enough. Flexibility in accommodations, really important to how we support people and recognizing that things are going to change and welcoming that. Our relationships, our commitment to having conversations, using open-ended questions, being curious and open and willing to continue to learn more, and having ongoing training on and building on what you've trained on before, making sure that you're looking also at long COVID on sensitivities and not just the usual suspects. So when it comes to disabilities, but to who are you missing? Are you doing sight loss? Are you doing deaf and hard of hearing? Who maybe have you not focused on? And, I'm coming down to a close now. On the next slide, I'm going to just talk a bit about the type of workshops and courses that we offer at Realize. We make it our business to support employers on their work in Ideal. We have workshops on episodic disabilities in the workplace that takes a deep dive into the models of disability, really looking at the different ways that ableism manifests, looking at the different types of accommodations in the workplace. We have an Ideal Ready certification course that is 3 courses that build on one another. plus with asynchronous learning, and that really encourages workplaces to gather together in cohorts and have really important conversations on what's needed in your workplace. And at the end of the certification, it's not the end of the work. We say that explicitly because this work never ends, but that we've helped support you in understanding how you can continue this work on your own. And once again, I'll say that's through relationships, that's through those conversations. And we also are able to really create courses, learnings, and trainings that's geared to what specific organizations need. So I welcome you to reach out to have more conversation with us around that. I also want to let you know that we are gearing up for our fourth, or is it fifth, annual Episodic Disability Summit coming up this March. Last year we had about 700 plus registrants. It grows every year. We have incredible speakers and presenters from government to research to those with lived experience, really giving critical insight and information on this topic. And the link will be dropped in the chat. And I invite you to register and come on out to this really great. It's 2 days. If you can't attend both days, come on the day that you can. I guarantee you that you will find information that will be useful to you. And to let you know that we also have an episodic disability forum that meets 4 times a year, where we gather together to discuss what we're grappling with. Where are we stuck, and to share best practices of what maybe we've done in our places of work, and what's going on in other areas. It's really important, as I said, to keep these conversations going. That's how this work moves forward. And so I want to thank you so much for the opportunity to engage and present with you today. And I've done a lot of speaking, and now I want to stop a little bit and hear from you, hear what your thoughts are, what your comments are, and give you your voice some time in this space. Thank you so much.
Great. Thanks so much. It was a really wonderful presentation, and especially just I really love this, like bringing the L into idea and bringing the leading to belongingness, reminding us of
Oh,
the purpose of all
yes.
of this work. It's really, really beautiful. And you said so many things. I could probably ask you questions for about 2 hours, but we'll turn to the audience. Um, for everyone in the audience to remember, if you have a question, please use the Q&A function, and then we'll get to your questions. We already do have some things written in here. Primarily, people are saying thank you, Ingrid. Really like appreciating what you've shared for advice for managers, employers, HR departments. Also, the point you made about building relationships costing $0 is so important. And from my experience too, I remember that really stuck with me because I had an interviewee once. I remember them saying uh, that they had, been through many jobs, and the employer that they had stayed with for the previous, I think it was 15 or 20 years, was the one who, after they started their job, said, "What can we do for you? We have this
Yes.
this suite of options available, but as your manager, what can I do for you?" And they said that was the
Mhm.
first manager who ever said that to me, and that's the one that they stayed with. And as you said, it
Absolutely.
doesn't cost, right?
It doesn't. And when you let people know that you are there for them, that opens the door to access that. Like, how often, do we hear that? Unfortunately, we don't often enough. And, you could be told that there were things available, but maybe you didn't know, and if people aren't talking about it openly, then it kind of seems like this, maybe dark little secret, or it gets stigmatized just by silence, just by not talking about it, and then you don't want to go there. So these little things that we do and say can make a huge difference. And that example that you shared really highlights that.
Mm, thank you. Okay, so we have a question here that I'll turn to. Oh, 1 second. Sorry. The question is, as someone who has an episodic disability, what are ways I can communicate to my work that when I call in sick, it's not because I'm
It's not because
because they are lazy.
I, you know, we hear about this a lot in our work, and I think a part of that is that's the onus on the workplace and not on you. One thing I can suggest as well is that a lot of times when workplaces like have their surveys or ask for the type of training that employees want to see in their workplaces, make sure that you're putting that forward that we need training around understanding episodic disability. We need training on understanding how to um, meet our employees with empathy and sensitivity and understanding. And call for that meeting to have that discussion if you feel that you are not receiving the type of reception or accommodation that you absolutely are entitled to. I would encourage you to have that conversation, to start that process. And, that doesn't necessarily guarantee that things will change that way, but I think right away, but I think getting that conversation started and escalating is things that we have to do more and more. We have to normalize advocating for and accessing our rights. Our rights are there, they are entrenched, and I feel like the more of us that really start speaking out and claiming what is ours by rights, we are rights holders. We are not asking for things that we're not entitled to, and it's time that I think that we make that clear and that we also seek support when we need it from organizations that offer that type of support, because it's a scary thing. And we have I realize we have a disclosure um kit that really like helps folks kind of determine like the culture in their workplace, and that can kind of help you to decide whether this is something that you can go on alone, or whether sometimes we need to seek support in doing what we need to do for ourselves.
It's a great answer. And I know I've talked to so many people who appreciate just not being alone in those moments and processes. So to know that Realize has those resources available, I think it's really important. Thank you.
Hmm.
Um, the next question is a bigger one. So I have a feeling some people in our audience should absolutely come to the events and activities that you mentioned with Realize, because there's a lot more to learn there. But you mentioned that, episodic disability is enshrined in the Accessible Canada Act, in the ACA. Uh, do you have advice for people at the policy level, and in government, based on the findings that you shared, that you might have for them?
Yeah, that it's really hard that people with disabilities feel like they have to be fighting for rights that we already have. We don't. What we need to be fighting for is implementation. That making a law and passing a law isn't enough. You need to back it. You need to give it teeth. You need to, protect us and protect our rights. And that having words on paper are great. And at the start, it's not enough. And we see that we really need the government to be backing policies that they enact and upholding rights holders, which we are. I also want our community to be speaking about ourselves as that. We are right holders. We are not asking for things that we don't deserve. We're not asking for handouts. We are asking for our rights that we are entitled to. And I think the more that we refer to ourselves that way, the more we speak up, with authority and speak out and work in solidarity together, the more that we will be able to really push the needle on this. I know that it's not a new battle. We've been fighting a long time for this, but we need to continue. The time to stop absolutely is not now. The time to gather together, to make our voices heard, to be speaking out. in our workspaces, in our recreation spaces, in any space that we occupy where we feel that our rights are being infringed upon, that we need to not take it in silence, that we need to report, and that we need to speak out and demand what is ours.
Mm, thank you. And so our next question reads, as a parent with a high school student with a disability who is also really smart, I recently had the experience of having the school try to scale back his accommodations because he was performing so well in class.
Mm-hmm.
I've been thinking about how that would translate into the workplace because he also recently lost a job where he did not disclose disability. Normally, performance is fantastic, but sometimes there can be issues around reading long emails or processing instructions uh, due to kind of neurodivergence and difference there. Do you have suggestions for that kind of experience? And when is there pushback on accommodations because performance is actually strong?
There, I think that we experience that a lot, and that comes down to that stigmatization and that those misperceptions around disability and what it looks like. People have their ideals of what you should and should not be able to do given a particular
Mhm,
disability, and we need to continue to push back against that. Doing well doesn't mean that you don't need the accommodation. Does that not speak to the accommodation working and doing what it
mhm,
should be doing? And then, I completely understand your child not disclosing in one sense because we are facing such a backlash, and neurodiversity is still an area where people really don't understand and don't understand that it's a spectrum and people having expectations of how certain conditions should manifest, if you have it and what you should be able to do and should not. But I really, as I said again, really think that the more of us who continue um, to speak out, um, to push back again, and to be willing, if we are able, either on our own or with support, to be able to. Um, I I feel like we need to work hard at getting workplaces to get better at being accommodating, because as I said, like you shouldn't have to disclose to get what you need. So we really need to push for that change, for workplaces to change. They're still trying to fit people into the status quo instead of changing that status quo and changing their modus operandi to meet diverse needs, to where people feel comfortable, if they want to disclose, or when actually they're doing it well, you don't need to, because they have such a plethora of support available that everybody is able to hand pick like what they need. So we need to change the cultures in our spaces, in our schools, in our workplaces, in our society in general, to do that. But I always encouraging accessing resources and agencies that we have available to us, um, to help us navigate, because it's not easy to navigate on our own, and everybody is individual and wants to go about things in the way that's best for them, and should be able to do that. And I think that we should access those organizations that support that, so that we can do that and not be trying to change ourselves to fit into it. So if your child does want to disclose, they should. If they don't, then they shouldn't have to either. But either way, I would always access organizations and resources and supports that can help you to navigate and to do things in the way that's most comfortable for yourself. And we know that the education system it's problematic. They are working to make changes, but we know that with a lot of things, that the implementation is not consistent. Sorry, my desk is
mhm.
moving up and down. If you might notice that, I'm trying to get it to stop doing that. But yeah, I'm not
Okay.
sure if I answered your question well. I hope I did, but please feel free to reach out to me as well, and attend our summit. We have such great information on a variety of topics. So I would encourage you to come out if you can. It's online, actually.
Yeah, it's really helpful, and it really resonates with me how important, and we see it in so much work in this space, how the power dynamic of disclosure plays out and expectations on either students or employees. But really, we need to have employers being educated and understand their role. So I
That's it is
very much
exactly is the
appreciate that.
onus is always like put on the person who is impacted, and we
Mhm.
really need to work together to collectively to change that dynamic and
Yeah.
put the onus back where it should. It's not easy. I am not going to pretend that that is, but I think the more that we continue to push back and speak back on that, we'll be able to move the dial on how that
Mhm.
that flows out.
Thank you. Uh, so our next question uh, is, do you have any ideas about how we can frame things like COVID and other viral safety kind of situations as accessibility in the workplace? And so for this, I'm imagining someone who might be immunocompromised, uh, and their experience in trying to make sure that their workplace is accessible to them.
Yeah, I'm not completely sure what the question is. How to frame that you have. Sorry, could you read the question again?
Yeah, of course. It's how we can frame things like viral safety, whether that be for COVID or other viruses, how we can frame them as an accessibility issue.
Well, I definitely see that as an accessibility issue. And I guess I'm hearing that that's not being accepted perhaps in the workplace. Um, and I don't know exactly what to say on how to frame that because I feel like just saying that as it
Yeah.
is should be sufficient, and I know that it's not, and so that speaks to again the further training and education that is needed in workplaces on a variety of different topics, and that's one that workplaces should be looking at, like when we're doing accommodations. A lot of times in general, but there's such nuanced experiences, and this is where the ongoing training and the ability for people to see their experiences reflected in training really like goes a lot and speaks a lot to that. I am not sure in terms of um whether yeah, I don't know exactly, and I'm
Mhm.
sorry, but that's the honest truth. I don't know exactly how to answer that question, and my thoughts are maybe around if you have a good relationship with your doctor, that a doctor might be able to help with that. Um, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, no, it's a question that I think maybe with more information. So the question asker, if you ever want to send either an email to myself or Ingrid, we can maybe follow up and get more information and explore that. Um, we have about 3 minutes left, so we'll go with one more question, if that's okay. You mentioned the importance of keeping track of information, of data, that if organizations don't know what's going on within their organization, they can't make change or they can't understand what's actually happening
Mhm.
in this space. Do you have an example of like an organization that's doing that well, or is this something that we're kind of trying to still build toward?
Um, I can't say exactly. I think that there are a lot of organizations. We don't have a lot of data on people with disabilities. We really don't. We don't have enough. There's a real gap there, and particularly I think from community-based research, because the research that has been done um, hasn't been done well
Mhm.
because they don't take into consideration a lot of factors that are really important to us. And that's why it's really important that we increase the research that's being led by community about community. And so there are a lot of organizations who are starting to do that. It's not like huge, I think, in scope, but we're working to improve that. But I can't say that there is like one specific person who's leading. I think that our organization is doing a good job in collecting data and research in the areas that we work in, HIV and episodic disabilities. And I imagine that many disability serving organizations across the country, and particularly, I guess I can speak to the ones that we've worked with in their own areas, are also conducting research, whether it's on women with disabilities or disabilities in the 2S LGBTQIA plus communities. But all those researches are need more funding and need to be expanded, and we need the ability to go more in depth. So the more that we can advocate for the support, I think, of community-based research will go a long way, I hope, in realizing funding to do that work and to close those gaps and to gather that data and that information. But I think overall, there's not enough out there.
Yeah, yeah, there's a very, very big need, it seems. Um, I want to make sure we'll close up in a moment, but are there any last points or just thoughts you want to share?
Myself,
Yes. Yeah.
I think the importance of us as a community continuing to learn about each other. Like sometimes I say, like, everybody understands their own pain. So, if you're living with an intellectual disability, you understand what that's like. If you're living with um like myself, living with blindness or partial sightedness, I understand that a lot. We need to, even within a community, understand and learn more about each other's experiences so that we can advocate for each other as well. So I think us continuing to gather, to convene, to learn as a group about one another, to probe these questions that we don't always have answers for, but we need to keep
Mhm.
asking them. We need to keep bringing them up. We need to keep grappling with them. Um, individually and together as a community. And so that's something that I really want to encourage is having these platforms and these opportunities to come together and see where the gaps still remain, see the progress that we're making, continue to learn and share with one another, and continue to move in solidarity as much as we can. I think that's really important.
Thank you. Yeah, and it resonates that the questions, that we don't have answers to are they're probably in many cases the most important ones to explore
Of
together.
course.
So yeah, much appreciated. It was a really lovely webinar. Thank you so much for joining us. Uh, I want to mention to the audience, our webinars are monthly, so please join us in February as well for our next one. This was the inaugural 2025 webinar. If you have any questions, please send us an email. It's info@bre-idea.ca. You can also find information on us online. We'll also in our newsletter be sharing about the next webinars, and please also check out the resources and the events that Ingrid mentioned. I'm personally quite excited about them. And also just thank you to our team involved in creating this webinar, making it happen. Akim Growal, Therese Selenix, Sabrina Chaudhry, Rebecca Dwertz, Neil Tompa, our French language interpreter, and our captioners as well. Very grateful for all of your work and contributions. And so, yeah, thank you everyone for joining us on this Friday afternoon, and I hope you have a nice weekend. Bye bye.
Thanks, everyone.